Let's get a good visual going here. The shop. Let me let me improve the angle here. This is my first time doing a live stream from my phone, and my brothers are live texting right now the Knights hockey game. Jeez, I don't even know who they're playing. I just know that they are playing. So, go Knights, go! Ugh. It has been a heck of a year. Probably for you guys as much as for me, in different ways. And it's customary for anybody with a presence online to do a best of year show, an end of year show. And so as I sent out earlier today in a completely rigged Twitter poll, I decided that I would review what my 2022 was like. Last year it was a lot of fun to throw around the list of books that I'd read. Excuse me here. Loves me some yerba. And I would try to share the link here, but we'll just have to see who's going to get the notice. I'm going to go through the list again of books that I read. I want to talk a little bit about movies, but not a whole lot because, excuse me, I'm just doing great on this thing. I'm not tuned into the chat, so whoever is joined, thanks for jumping in and watching. I didn't watch a whole lot of movies. I tried a couple of TV shows, and basically everything on a screen sucks. I'm only subscribed to Amazon because I use Prime for the free shipping. I've debated punting on Disney Plus, and in fact we cut it out for a while, but there are a couple of shows that are good for kids that my kids really like, so we don't tune into any of the new crap. I haven't watched a Marvel show in a year. Marvel's dead, and I'm keeping it that way. I've also got a few more things to talk about. We're just going to review different states because I moved from Utah to Oklahoma, and I crossed a few places in between. And here we are. So without further ado, let's jump in on the books that I read in 2022. A year, Witchy Eye, and a couple of other series that I've mentioned over the years. This one was what's called a Sword and Planet novel. It happens on an alien planet, but the technology level is kind of analog, Earth analog, swords, shields, that kind of thing. All of the species are semi-animal related. They talk about what reptile species need and what human species need, or primate species, whatever. It was a very well-established but very different world, and he did a good job of presenting that while also telling what was essentially a buddy cop story about two guys trying to solve a case of insurance fraud. That's just the kind of thing that DJ can come up with. Ironically, this time last year was my single highest earning week at work. I ended up working 6 straight days, so I got a 6-day bonus. And then I ended up working on a holiday week, so the overtime kicked in super hard. And I wasn't planning on working, but an emergency happened. There was a snowstorm that was so bad that it blocked the road to Idaho. I was supposed to go see my in-laws, but I couldn't make it, so I ended up just working. And that day in Park City, which had gotten an extra, 2-3 feet of snow the night before, and not everything had been plowed, I had an 8-hour route. It took me 10 hours to do it. It was insane. But in that time, I listened to In the Palace of Shadow and Joy by DJ Butler, and it was great. I listened to, after that, the new audio recording of The Fellowship of the Ring, narrated by Andy Serkis. Perfection. Northwind, that was Gary Paulson's final novel, released just a few months after he died. Haven't reviewed it here. It kind of hurts to say that it was sort of meh, but I'd go back and read it again just to see if maybe I was in a better mood for it. It's strange. January is a bad time of year for me. It's one of the 3 months that I just hate. It's cold, nothing exciting happens. Yeah, there's playoff football, but I'm a Colts fan. We haven't had that in a while. So I'm just kind of waiting to get through it, and even when I'm reading something good, it's hard for me to be into it, so maybe I'll try it again later. Ironically then, the next 2 books on the list were on the best of year list, Killers of the Flower Moon and Bust Hell Wide Open. See my previous video for reviews of those. Beowulf, the Seamus Heaney edition, Heaney perhaps is how it's said. I want to read the Tolkien translation of that. I've got Seamus Heaney's on audio, but if I get around to buying a print copy for my library, I want to get a nice Tolkien edition of that. Hate Crime Hoax by Wilfred Riley. He runs a website called, I think, hatecrimehoax.com, and he talks about kind of the endemic situation where people like claim that they were a victim of some sort of marginalized group focused hate crime, and then it turns out to be bunk, but they get a lot of traction, they get a lot of media attention, and the majority of the cases that he cited were people from the left wing will say crying wolf, but he also cited cases where it happened on the right wing. It happens in different ways. Just something to help you be a little bit extra skeptical when suddenly the news descends on a hate crime story, and just give it 48 hours. It might turn out to be bullcrap, because it goes that way pretty frequently. A book called The Bushido Code. I listened to that one on YouTube, funnily enough. Somebody put the audio there and I listened to it there. The writer was a Japanese man named Nitobe. And in a matter of pure coincidence, today I just finished listening to The Complete Gentleman by Brad Miner. The review is on my new book review site, crackerstack.substack.com. He talked about the history of Western chivalry and gentlemanry and so on and so forth. Bushido is the Japanese equivalent of that. It's not any single codified thing, a list of behaviors that we ought to embrace or that they ought to embrace. It's something that's more passed down generationally. That's how it works. But the book Bushido is a list of general tenets to abide by, in Japanese culture. That gets us into February. Total book list count. I'm doing great. The total count for January was 9 books. It was also 9 for February. I reread Witchy Winter, say that fast, by David Butler. It's the sequel to Witchy Eye. I read the biography of Geronimo by a man named Barrett, but he just transcribed it. Geronimo didn't speak English. So, he gave this interview, this account of his life through a translator to Barrett. And that's how he wrote that down. Just fascinating insight into the life of an Apache man who lived during the sunset, we'll say, of Native American dominance in North America. Legend of Bass Reeves by Paulson, best of year list. Erasing America by a man named Robbins. I've got a print copy of that. I'm going to be doing a lot of video breakdown bit of that. 4 Years in the Stonewall Brigade by a man named Kasler. When you're reading memoirs of somebody in war, you've really got to remind yourself from time to time, like, I'm not reading a narrative, a story, something that's going to have an arc or follow the structure or rules. I'm just reading a record. Because at times when I'm reading war records written by veterans, I almost am like waiting for something big to happen, something that would move the story along. But I've got to remind myself, like, this isn't that. Real life doesn't really follow those story beats. When I read Always with Honor by Pyotr Wrangel, or Storm of Steel by Ernst Junger, or Mine Were of Trouble by Peter Kemp, these are all war memoirs. Kind of the same thing with 4 Years in the Stonewall Brigade. It was about a group of different men who fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. Ben Thompson, he's got a series called Guts and Glory. Somewhat stylized and punched up accounts of real people that fought in different wars. His book on the Civil War was really good, and this is his book on the American Revolution. Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynne, same guy who wrote the book about Stonewall Jackson that I really loved and made my best of list in 2020. This one was about Quanah Parker and the Comanches. In the same vein that I read a bunch of Oklahoma books without really setting out to, I read a lot more books about American Indians this year too. February was also when I read Titan by Rob Cruzy. That was the first book in the Mammon series. The second book made the best of year list. And then Beren and Luthien by Tolkien. March, I read 8 books. The War on History by Jarrett Stepman. Very similar vein to Erasing America. I ended up buying a print copy because, again, I want to go through it bit by bit and do some writings on it. The Wisdom of the Shire. I did not write down the name of the author. It's one of those books that's like a satellite to Tolkien. It's a guy talking about his own experiences reading it, and if you were to apply the principles by which the hobbits live, what would your life look like? And just a feel-good book. It gives you some ideas on maybe traditions that you could start and things that you could do to develop better friendships and relationships with people that you care about. Quixote by Cervantes. I finished that one. Holy crap! It's one of those books that's a classic that was written for a different time in terms of its attention span. It's just all over the place, but there's a lot of good in it. I did a video on it. It's on the channel here. God and Man at Yale by Buckley. My brother gave me that in 2009. Got around to reading it 13 years later. He was lamenting in the 70s how Yale was becoming a godless institution and moving away from its founding. So apparently that's nothing new. A book on the Dodge Brothers by Hyde. I'm going to reread that one probably this year and write a review on it. I've also got a book about Walter P. Chrysler, which is on my to-read list for 2023. Dry Bones by Craig Johnson. That was one of the first Longmire novels that I'd heard of. So I heard of the show first, and then Audible made a recommendation years ago, like, oh, check this one out. It's about Walt Longmire solving a case surrounding a T-Rex skeleton. And I was like, oh, this is a book series. So, and then I got into the books, and it took me this long to get up to book 8 or whatever that is. Tier 1000 by Jason Anspach and Doc Spears. I reviewed that one on upstreamreviews.com. Very cool book. It's about soldiers in modern day or futuristic wars that die and kind of go to a Valhalla type place, and they continue their training under gods of war from different mythologies to fight in the afterlife. The Island by Gary Paulson. That was recommended by a viewer here on the channel, a Brazilian man who teaches in Canada. Beautiful, moving book, just signature Paulson. In April, I went from 8 or 9 books to 4. This was when the Depp v. Heard trial started, and I never in my life have given a crap about celebrity divorce tabloid crap, but because I follow Rekieta Law and his friends' coverage of the channel, they made it very, very interesting, and the story of the case itself was fascinating. So I followed that a lot, and it ate into my reading time when I was at work. Family Business by Mike Kupri. Another sci-fi novel, another Upstream review. That one, it takes place in the future after humanity has repelled an alien invasion, and they're in the process of rebuilding the old governments, and so they're in this kind of transitory phase where the government has to rely on some fly-by-night companies, some bounty hunter groups that move in between the lines and try to find people who were alien sympathizers and collaborators during the war. Very cool book, very cool concept. He did a great job. Spell or High Water by Scott Meyer. That one was the second in the Magic 2.0 series. Those books, I got to the third one, and by the third one it became kind of predictable, but it's a love letter to nerddom, especially the guys that grew up in the 70s and 80s. Very good, very clean, just good fun adventure. It can be pedestrian. It works well as a palate cleanser if you're moving between big epics. You want to stop and calm down and read something that's a little bit more, just steady and reliably good. That's a good series. In May, I read 7 books. I listened to The Two Towers, again, the Andy Serkis narration. I tried a new Courtney Crumrin Chronicles series by Ted Naife. So he wrote 7 books in his first arc series of Courtney Crumrin. All epic, awesome. He took a few years off and came back, and he wrote this follow-up series, and it did what a lot of comic series have done, where it follows up and it's just bad. It's nowhere near what it was before. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend the follow-up series, but definitely check out the Courtney Crumrin Chronicles. Geez, I'll do a video of it here. Indiana Cryptids by David Weatherly. I read his Nevada Cryptids book in 2020, and the Indiana one was like twice as long. I finished reading it while I was in Kentucky, but more on Kentucky later. I read Saints Volume 3. That's a book about church history that the church put out. I reread Airman by Owen Colfer. We read that to the kids. Dead Acre by Bruno and Rhett. That's what the surnames are. I can't remember their first names. I was rereading this one because it was a novella that was a prequel to the start of a main series, and I wanted a refresher on it before I jumped into the main book. And then Binary by Crichton. This one was a thriller that he wrote under a pseudonym before he became, Michael Crichton. They're all being kind of repackaged and republished and punched up. And it was, a smart guy working for the government trying to beat a terrorist who was looking for chemical agents to mix together to drop at the 1972 presidential party convention in San Diego. He doesn't say Nixon, but it was, for Nixon. One thing that really sticks with me from that book is the government agent. So Crichton's pseudonym is John. The hero of this book's name is John, and the villain's name is John. It's just John's on the brain. He's very good at picking up and memorizing details in an investigation, like kind of Jack Reacher style. And somebody says to him, it's like, "Oh, you must be, autistic or have like a special gift or something." And he whirls on the guy, and he's like, "There's nothing special about the way that my brain works. I just pay attention. Anyone can do it." I like that. There's this tendency, now, and it's gotten worse in the 40, 50 years since Crichton published that book. And there's this tendency now for people to write characters that are hyper attentive or focused to details like that, and give them some kind of mental diagnosis and say like, "Oh, they're only able to do this because their brain works this way because they have this neurodiversity or whatever." It's like, you don't have to have a diagnosable condition to have a mind that connects details that way and that is analytical in that way. You can just be that way. I liked that. In June, I read 5 books. Be Free or Die by Lineberry. That one, if I'm not much mistaken, was a biography about Robert Smalls, who was a black man who led a group of other black men who stole a Confederate naval vessel during the Civil War, sailed it through the blockade, turned it over to the North, ended up becoming, later on in life, becoming a politician in South Carolina. Like, guts on this guy. Very, very good story. Cold as Hell by Bruno and Castle. That was the sequel to Dead Acre. Defender of Lions by Brian C. Hales. I wrote a review for that one on Upstream. An Obvious Fact. That was another Longmire story. In Another World by Miles English. There's a genre of lit RPG called Isekai where it's generally accepted that it's video games, but it's basically any other fantasy portal type thing. An Isekai novel is where something comes from a fantasy realm into our realm, or vice versa. A lot of them are poorly written, and that's almost a staple of the genre. This one was pretty well done. I enjoyed it, and I reviewed it there. July, I read 6 books, including Blood and Thunder by Hampton Sides. That one largely followed the career of Kit Carson, but it also really chronicled a lot of significant moments in the westward expansion, up to and including the defeat of the Navajo by the United States government. Absolution by Rick Partlow. That's one that I'll probably go back and read again. It had kind of a Firefly feel to it, but it wasn't about a ship that had that big of a crew. There was a bounty hunter guy who took a job and picked somebody up, and then had to flip and change his mind and go a different direction. It was good. Not a whole lot of details about it are sticking out in my mind right now, which is probably why I need to go back and re-listen to it. Colorado River Basin Exploration. I just have Colorado River in the title. So that was an audiobook based on the record of John Wesley Powell's exploration of the Colorado River Basin, which was awesome. John Wesley Powell was a Civil War veteran. After the war, he goes out west to map and explore the basin because its resources are of interest to the government and to prospectors and to settlers and to all that. You get to like the end of this 12-hour audiobook before he mentions for the first time that this dude lost an arm in the Civil War. And he's out there, riding through rapids on canoes and boats and stuff with his crew. He's rappelling, he's climbing cliffs and stuff. Didn't complain once about having to do all this crap one-handed. He's intense. This was a really good book, and the audiobook especially was nice because they put sound effects in the background, like when he's on a river, you hear the babbling brook, you hear birds and stuff in the wilderness. Very good audio production. I grabbed 2 more after that, including a book written by Teddy Roosevelt about exploring the Amazon in Brazil, and another one by another guy about the San Francisco Gold Rush and crossing Death Valley in 1949, which, I've been to Death Valley and I've worked in Panamint Valley, and it is not a forgiving landscape. I really want to read that book. And then Planeswalker #1 by M.A. Rothman. He's a really smart guy and a good writer. I'm going to be honest, I remember 0 about that book. August, I read 8 books. Mercury Falls by Rob Cruzy. That was a reread because it had been a couple of years since I read it, and I've got the first 4 in that series. Later, I've got Mercury Rises on the list in that same month. So I read book 1 and 2 in August. Ghost Reaper Girl #1. That was a manga, and I don't think I finished it. The Butlerian Jihad by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. That was the first of many Dune prequels to be published in the early 2000s by Frank Herbert's son and Kevin J. Anderson, who might still hold the record for the biggest sci-fi novel advance ever given to him by a publisher. I got to the end of that one and I thought, this is awesome. This is how you respectfully handle a prequel to somebody else's property. Geez, I wish any number of corporations would have abided by the same principle when adapting, Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, you freaking name it. But that one was good. I went to go read the second one later, and I wasn't in the mood for that one, the Machine Crusade, but the Butlerian Jihad was good. The Wilding Probate by D.J. Butler. That was Butler writing a YA novel, and I reviewed that one on Upstream. The thing that stuck out to me is that he's writing this teen protagonist who is competent for what she has to do, but she's not up to every single task that comes her way, largely because of her youth. It's nice every once in a while to read a YA where the teen characters are realistic, but at the same time admirable. Like, oh, okay, they've got to be a little bit grown up based on their circumstances, but they're not 35-year-olds in 16-year-old bodies. Cool book. Starblades #1. That was a comic, a graphic novel by Kyle Ritter, with just enough words to hold the art together. If you're not familiar with him, he's a colorist for Ethan Van Sciver, who is a very accomplished comic book artist and graphic novelist. Kyle Ritter is a deaf mute, and he makes up for his lack of hearing with being far more zeroed in on the visual world, and he is an exceptional colorist. Starblades is kind of a generic space fantasy comic that works almost like a prequel to a longer series. I'm very interested in reading a sequel to it. This book basically just sets up a bunch of heroes called the Starblades that have to go fight a big bad out in space. But the art is beautiful because Kyle is awesome. Land of Wolves, that's another Longmire book. Dark Harvest by Will Jordan, known to the world as the Critical Drinker. I got a lot of respect for guys that make a name for themselves as movie critics, as story critics, and then turn around and throw their skin in the game because, if they make a living by judging the works of others, they're at least putting themselves in the arena and opening themselves up to the same judgment. And like that's cool. A lot of respect for him. I had tried reading another Critical Drinker book before and didn't really care for it, mostly based on content. But this one it was almost like a Dan Brown book if Dan Brown could write. It wasn't, mind-blowing and exceptional in terms of like its concept or anything, but it was a simple concept, well executed, and it had just enough cool elements in it to make it stand above its peers in the genre. No, you can't. The door's locked, baby. My daughter's trying to come in. Go inside. I didn't want them running around and getting on stream while I'm doing this. September, we get to, I didn't count the books here, 6. I would end up with 3 best of year books. 4, geez, that many. Mammon Messiah, An Unwelcome Quest by Meyer, that's another one of the Magic 2.0 books. My Life with Charlie Brown, 1620, and This Boy and His Mother. So, yeah, September was a heavy-hitting month for me. Again, if you want to see my reviews on those, the previous video, my Best of 2022 video, covers those. 62, Taboo by Wilfred Riley. It's 10 facts that you're not allowed to talk about. Mostly with regard to stuff that I guess could get you canceled, things that you're not supposed to observe. It's nothing exceptionally spicy. I got to the end of it and I was like, that was a good book. I thought it might be a little bit different, but it's kind of in the same vein as his hate crime hoax thing. Like, you're not supposed to say that people are faking hate crimes and yada yada yada. He's a good, competent writer. In October, I only read 5 books. One of them was the best of the year. Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. Dead Girl by Craig Nybo. Good Halloween read. I'm pretty sure I reviewed that one on Upstream. The Midnight Front by David Mack, and an utterly meh World War II paranormal fantasy book. Spirit of Steamboat by Craig Johnson. That was an exceptionally good Longmire short story. I think the audio was only like 4 hours, but it was better than a lot of the full installments. Next to Last Stand, that was a full-length Longmire book that centered on, geez, this is kind of nuts. So I've watched all the Longmire seasons. There was one episode that focused on Longmire finding this old missing painting of Custer's Last Stand, the one that Anheuser-Busch uses in a lot of their promotional material. The real thing in real life is missing, and so Craig Johnson wanted to write this book about Longmire finding it. But that was an episode of the show years and years ago before it ended up being one of the plots of the book. So it's this big kind of incestuous relationship between the writers of the show and the writers of the writer of the series. November, I read 7 books. They Knew They Were Pilgrims by John Turner. I'm pretty sure I did a video on Mayflower books back in early November. That one had a lot of good details in it, but once Turner started editorializing and throwing his own spin on things, it became a lot less interesting. Always with Honor, the aforementioned Russian Civil War Memorial by Pyotr Wrangel. The Mayflower by Rebecca Fraser made my best of the year list. The In and Out book by Stacy Perman, did a review on that. Boomtown by Sam Anderson, did a review on that. The Highwayman by Craig Johnson, another Longmire book. This was the year that I got all caught up on Longmire. I've still got the most recent book that came out in September on hold at the library, and it'll be out in a couple of weeks. So I won't get to it this year because this year ends in a few hours. And then African Samurai by Lockley and Girard. I did a video on that one on Yasuke. Now we get into December, and there's 6 more books. That gets us to the total of 80 on the year. The books were Ascendant by, I think the author's name was Mark Miller. That book, it was fine. It was basically another Aragon. There's a dragon and a chosen one. Mistborn, The Lost Metal by Sanderson. Great ending to the second era of Mistborn. He's reliably and consistently very good. I haven't read the last 2 that are out in his Stormlight Archive series. And I believe book 5, so I've read 1 and 2. I haven't read 3 and 4, and I believe book 5 comes out this fall. So I'm going to go back and reread that series this year. But yeah, Lost Metal, very strong ending, very good stuff. Really liked it. What do we got here? Somebody jumped in. Okay, that's good. Hello to whoever's watching. Wait for Sign, another another Longmire story. That was a collection of short stories, but it was all put together in audio. There were 12 short stories, and a lot of them were pretty good. I think there was maybe one of them that was just dumb, and I didn't finish listening to it. So I looked for Christmas books to read in December, and there is a Christmas book in that series, but it was only available in ebook. I was like, I don't know if I'll get around to reading an ebook this December with things being as busy as they are. Ben says Stormlight 5 currently pegged for fall 2024. Okay, well that gives me plenty of time to get caught up on those four, like Ben did this year. Plus, I'm also reading the Sun Eater series, and I'm going to reread the King Raven trilogy. I've got some big series to mow through this year, but I'm getting back into high gear with my reading. I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive. My goal the last couple of years has been to kind of ramp down and do fewer than 100 books, and this year I'm just like, you know what? I've got like 3 websites to write for. Why don't I just read and review a book like every 2 days, and then I won't have brain fart moments like this where I tell you about a book and I'm like, honestly, I remember nothing about it. I don't want to do that anymore. But anyway, Wait for Sign had the audio of Christmas in Absaroka, and now that I think about it, that Spirit of Steamboat short story technically happened on Christmas Eve. It wasn't explicitly a Christmas story. It was more of a Walt and his drunk boss fly a museum airplane through a snowstorm. But so good. Johnson is so dang good. Side note, before I forget, check out the Ironside podcast by Tom Dinkelman and Brett Kane. I'd heard that Brett had that podcast for a while, but the first episode that I tuned in on was when he got Craig Johnson on as a guest. Like, he's gotten some big internet personalities, but when he got Craig Johnson, it was like, oh, this isn't just a dude interviewing his bros. Like, he's getting big names to interview on a show, and that was awesome. I also heard that Graham Bradley was on it, and that interview lasted like 2 hours. You should go check that one out. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare by Giles Milton. That is a nonfiction that would work really well as a Guy Ritchie movie. Do a heist, get the team together, and go do some ungentlemanly British things as you go fight the Nazis in between, Neville Chamberlain getting punted as Prime Minister and, Winston Churchill getting the full British war machine up and running. The nonfiction itself was up and down, but what it covered was generally interesting. And then this week I finished reading Seasteading by Joe Quirk and Patrick Friedman. There was a tech discussion in it and a political discussion in it. The tech discussion was good, the political discussion was stupid. But I'm going to take stuff from the tech discussion and I'm going to put it into future novels. That's really what I wanted to get out of it. And then today I finished the Complete Gentleman by Brad Miner, and again, Cracker. I can't even remember my own freaking URL. Crackerstack.substack.com. I'm still going to be posting regularly at dreadpennies.com. That's going to be kind of larger publishing related news. Crackerstack is where I'm going to be doing my own reviews, primarily with nonfiction, because I'm still a fiction contributor over at Upstream Reviews. So keep checking the episode descriptions on this regularly for links to stuff like that. But that is the breakdown of all the books that I read this year. 11 made the best of year list. I listened to 69 audiobooks, nice, and read 11 books in print. And that includes some graphic novels. I don't think I read a single ebook this year, which, I'm not saying that as a flex. I just don't care for ebooks. I can't sit there and look at a screen. I mean, obviously I can if I'm farting around with videos or something, but I can't just sit there and read a book on a screen. It would drive me nuts. I made the mistake of opening up my YouTube app and seeing that it gives you stats on your watch hours, and it's like, you average 4 hours and 20 minutes a day, and that's down 8%. I'm like, oh. Caveat, I have YouTube Premium. And so I can download videos and then like turn my screen off and they'll play and I can just listen to them. So it's more or less a podcast thing. So I'm listening to 4 hours a day of content, we'll say. There are a bunch of channels that I follow, some for current events, some for, history, for particular interests, for whatever. And, so I listen to a lot of those, but maybe that's got a lot to do with why I only read 80 books this year instead of my customary 100, 112 or whatever. But we're getting the band back together for 2023. All right, so I also jokingly said I was going to review some states. This year I moved out of Utah. Beautiful state, and as long as you're outside of Salt Lake and Utah counties, with the exception of a few handfuls of people, you'll be fine. For a guy that was born in LA, grew up in Vegas, and moved to Salt Lake, I really hate large municipalities, and here I am living right in the armpit of Oklahoma City. But Oklahoma City is a little bit different compared to other ones. There are plenty of things that I'm going to miss about Utah, primarily a number of the people there. My kids already miss living in the same house as their grandma. And we knew that was going to be a challenge. We knew that they were going to miss giving that up, but there were things that we were going to get here that we just couldn't get there. We crossed Colorado and a portion of Wyoming and Kansas to get here. In Colorado, we got into a truck accident. We were driving down 2-lane construction zone, and some guy had some crap in his pickup truck that wasn't secured, and it blew out and landed on the windshield of a car kind of next to us, and he ended up losing control of his car and swerving in front of me, and I T-boned him with the moving truck. I didn't want to rent a moving truck. I wanted to just pull a trailer with my Durango. In retrospect, I'm glad that I was driving the moving truck and didn't, damage my beautiful Durango that I'd wanted for 20 years and got 6 months before this accident happened. And we made a friend out of it. We ended up giving him a ride all the way to Salina, Kansas. I get the pronunciation messed up because there's a place in Utah called Salina, or maybe it's in Colorado. I don't know. We gave him a ride, and I talked to him for the rest of the way down. Nice kid, 20 years old, and good dude. He'll be fine. He pulled through. But we spent the first night in Wyoming. We spent the second night in Kansas. I've got a story idea set in Hutchinson, Kansas, and I ended up getting to drive through it. And I was like, okay, this is kind of perfect. So I pulled into Oklahoma, found our house, started making friends in the ward, and it's great here. I love it. There are parts of the greater municipality that are very, run down and ghetto, and then you get to the peripherals of it and you see the countryside, and it's beautiful. Obviously, huge Native American presence here. This is where the government dumped them all after it kicked them out of everywhere else. They've got fortified areas and reservations, and they get to preserve what's left of their culture. The very first day that I was in the job, here at this branch of the company that I'm with, I worked with a man who's been doing this job for 25 years. I didn't ask him about percentages or anything. He's Native American from, Tribe A, and he's registered with Tribe A, and it wasn't until he was, in his mid-20s that he found out that his biological father was actually from Tribe B, but, he wasn't the guy that he thought he was. And, it's interesting learning about people that grew up very, very different from me. It helps me to understand my own upbringing better, understand the blessing that I had of growing up in a 2-family stable household until, I became an adult. And, the more you learn about other people, I think the more sympathetic you'll be to the plights of others. This guy's stable, got a good family, got a good career, all that stuff. He's been able to avoid a lot of the, poverty and broken homeness that we'll say disproportionately affects people of his demographic. I like learning, and I think the best way to learn about people is from people. Even though I spend all this time, reading books and trying to grasp at things that are outside of my reach. Living in a place that's different from anywhere else I've been before is just going to be that much more educational for me and my family. So Those were the new states that we got to visit, and this is where I live now, and it's been wonderful. This has been a lousy year for movies. I only went to the theaters twice to see the same movie, to see Top Gun Maverick, because it was awesome. There's a reason it made $1 billion. Apparently, the new Avatar movie is doing really great. Don't know, don't care, not going to see it. Kind of done with James Cameron. He did great things back in the day for cinema. He's not really doing them anymore. I don't understand what the appeal of these movies is. Marvel's dead. Star Wars is dead. Star Trek is dead. It's all just dead. So here I am looking for other things to watch. One of the best shows that I've watched in the last couple of years is Clarkson's Farm on Prime. Season 2 is dropping in February, and I'm excited for that one. My brother has a farm in Ohio, and I go and watch Clarkson's Farm and see him belly aching about the particular hardships of farm life, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, this is what Jordan's been talking about for the last 5 years. This is how expensive it is. This is how hard it is. This is how fickle the whole thing is. This is what the government wants to do. And great show there. The wife and I are rewatching Mando with the kids. We're rewatching Smallville. I'm going to do some posts about that on the site. I had a thread on Twitter a couple of days ago, mainly because Al Goff and Miles Miller, who are, I think, the showrunners for the Wednesday Addams show that's on Netflix right now, somebody asked him some questions about Smallville. It's gotten a second breath to it, we'll say, Smallville has, because Michael Rosenbaum and Tom Welling, who played Lex and Clark, are doing the Talkville podcast where they're rewatching it and breaking down the episodes every week. And people are going back and rewatching it. We've got a lot to do with why I'm rewatching it with my wife. She's never seen it before. They're saying, we wish that, if we were to go do it now, we would do things a little bit differently. We would have given the female characters some more agency. And it's like, that's an intersectional, wokey, Bechdel, whatever the hell you want to call it type thing, where you've got to pay lip service to the only thing that you're allowed to do with corporate writing these days. If you work for a big studio or a big streaming platform, it's almost like you know what's coming. You know that there's going to be boxes to check. Okay, we've got to have this feminist moment. We've got to have a strong female character stand up and say, I'm not going to get married. You're only allowed to have one straight white male character, and he's got to be evil, and everything else has got to be, this type of diverse and in that direction. And it makes for bad storytelling. I'm not opposed to diversity on the screen. Make it make sense. One of the best, not even just cartoons, but shows that we've gotten in the last 15, 20 years was Avatar: The Last Airbender. And that had its, diversity elements built into the world building. And then M. Night Shyamalan comes along and does a live action version of it, and all the good people are white and the one brown kid is the villain. I'm like, oh my gosh, you had a chance to make that right. People were rightly mad about that, and then Rings of Power comes along, and it's the inverse problem, not the reverse problem, but same thing. It's just bad. If you've got a good property and it's got a built-in fan base, adapt it according to the principles that made it popular to begin with. Is it so difficult? But corporations buy things and then try to twist them around and make them into Muppets that parrot their values instead of the values of the original creator. And in that process, they destroy what made it great to begin with. And we're left as fans of those original properties with the dregs of it, feeling like crap for having watched it and supported it and getting it to that point. So that's got a ton to do with why I write for Upstream, why I'm glad to collaborate with the other writers there, because we're out here finding the stuff that's being created today. 99% of it is books. If a good show recommendation comes along and we can boost the signal on that, we will. But we're finding things today that are great and that are worth your attention, and that's why we put it on Upstream. And it is a fiction review website, which is kind of why I'm doing the Cracker Stack now. Because I read a significant amount of nonfiction, and I want to share that with people the same way that we're getting sci-fi and fantasy in front of others. So that's kind of the general state of things. Sorry, I've got some text and stuff coming in here. That gets us to about 45 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. As a final note, I know Ben is kind of laughing because I said a final note in one of my videos and I went on for like 20 more minutes. Here's what's coming for me next year. If you've listened to the Rad Cracker podcast, you've heard me talk about this stuff. Publishing. I am going to publish Howling Wilderness. I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to brand that one, but it's set in the same world as my Engines of Liberty trilogy. This is not an Engines of Liberty book. It might be an Engines of America book. I'm having trouble figuring that out. The reason why I say that is it's an alternate timeline, mechanics versus mages. I've got trilogies that are set in different points in the timeline. Engines of Liberty takes place in an alternate 1984. Howling Wilderness takes place in an alternate 2034. Parallel to that, there's going to be another trilogy called Engines of Justice. One of the characters from Howling Wilderness will feature in that trilogy. And then down the road, I've got another trilogy that'll kind of cap it all off called Engines of Tyranny. But that'll come many years in the future. I've also got a plan for a 1600s, 1700s prequel trilogy called Engines of Piracy, which will only have a tangential relation to the Engines of Liberty trilogy, but it's this whole ecosystem of novels and stories that I have. And Howling Wilderness is a story I've wanted to tell in that world for a very long time. I'm going to get that published. I'm also going to get a print edition of Sheriff Porter out, as well as print editions of the Guild of Eldritch Adventurers and Answerable Courage, which is my Thanksgiving epic fantasy. Time permitting, I'm going to compile the 3 Engines of Liberty books into an omnibus edition so that it can all be available in one. I'm having a devil of a time getting some of the pictures edited and compiled correctly in the print edition of Patriots Game, because Amazon's Create Space engine changed something and now the whole thing is buggered. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be publishing. I'm going to work on getting some videos out. I'm not committing to any particular number of videos. When they're ready, they'll get posted. Rad Cracker podcast is going to keep being a weekly thing. I just record that on my phone as I'm driving home from work. And what else? I'm going to review 100 books a year on Cracker Stack. And in this very shop, I'm going to do 25,000 push-ups this year. Maybe not all of them in this shop. Some of them I'm going to do at work. But I'm going to get it done. A lot of the things that were impediments to me reaching my goals this year are no longer on the table. I don't have a pending move this year. God willing, I'm never going to move again. This is the house that I'm going to retire in. And I don't have to worry about scheduling that and getting thrown off of my rhythm or anything. I'm able to take a little bit more sturdy control of my schedule and my projects and my responsibilities, and I'm looking forward to having a much more productive year now that I know that all I've got to do is write it down on the calendar and then just attack it and get it done. So thank you, all of you, for being a part of that. Thanks to everybody who went back and watched this and who's watching my other stuff. I'm going to keep pushing a little bit more aggressively to make sales, to market, and to get closer to making a living doing this than I am doing all my truck driving. I'm coming up on 10 years of being a trucker, and I'm ready to make the transition that I've been trying to make for the last 15. But we'll talk more about that when the time is appropriate. Thanks everybody for watching. Love you guys. Drive safe. See you out there.